Like I said before, and I've said it with our players, this is a personal decision.
Welcome back to Infinite Auburn, and there are two main stories I want to cover today. The first one I want to talk about is the obvious elephant in the room, and that is Bryan Harsin testing positive for COVID-19. I want to talk a little about that. I'm going to keep politics out of it. I'm really not going to talk about any health concerns or anything. I strictly want to talk about this from a competitive point of view. And the second story I want to talk about today concerning Auburn football is the news of two recent commits to Auburn this past week and how that changes Auburn in the newest recruiting rankings nationally and in the SEC. First up, Harsin tested positive for COVID-19 on August 19th. He's currently not showing any symptoms, but he will have to be in isolation for the next 10 days unless there is a policy that changes that. I know there was last year the option if they had 3 negative tests in a row, each test 24 hours after the other one, and all 3 were negative, they could test out of that quarantine. So that may still be in place for this season. More than likely what's going to happen is Harsin will be back about 6 days to a week before the first game, so in about 7 days, but we will have to see which day he actually makes it out of that quarantine. Like I said, I'm keeping the politics out of this. We're looking at this strictly from a football point of view and how it affects the game. So let's get into that. What we do know is, as I mentioned, Harsin's out, but we also have some players who have tested positive, so they will be out for that same period of time unless they continue to show symptoms, but we don't know the state of those players. We also know that we have players who are out due to close contact tracing. That means they were not vaccinated, they were close to somebody who was positive, therefore they have to be in self-isolation for a period of time, which if it's the same was 10 to 14 days last year. We'll have to see what that is for this season, but last I heard it is that 10 to 14 day period. I will say from a football point of view, I'm not concerned about those players being back. I do, wish them well and hope they do stay well. But as far as the time period, our first 2 games are really just going to get us ready for when we go to Penn State. That being said, what I'm about to say, I don't want to say this to anger anybody, but this is competitive football talk under the current conditions. Teams who have a higher percentage of vaccinated players and coaches have a competitive advantage. Let me explain why. And this is something that's been said by Sankey, something that's been said by Saban, and I'll get into what they said about that in just a little bit. But first, let's look at the teams, the most competitive teams in the SEC and the last reported vaccination rate for their players that we know about. Within the past week or two, we heard from Saban that over 99% of his players are vaccinated. He said it's down to only 1 player who is not vaccinated. We heard from Georgia on SEC Media Days that Georgia is over 85%. I imagine that has improved since then. We've heard that LSU is over 97% and their coaching staff is at 100%. At SEC Media Days, Bryan Harsin said Auburn was about 60% vaccinated. Let's talk about why that puts Auburn at a disadvantage from a competitive point of view. This is why the vaccination rate matters. Set aside the politics, set aside that what you think about the vaccine and health and anything like that. That's not what I'm talking about today. We're just discussing competitive advantages. If you have a player who has had the vaccine, the rules state that if that player is a close contact of a positive case, they do not have to quarantine. Last season, what we saw from a lot of players on a lot of teams is that they miss games because they were close contacts. If a player gets the vaccine, they can avoid this. This is why you see Kirby Smart and Nick Saban and all these coaches at these very competitive schools pushing vaccines. Yes, they may be looking at the health side. Like I said, that's not what we're discussing. But from a competitive point of view, they know their players will not have to sit out and miss games if they are close to someone who is positive. So Why is Harsin not pushing this more? He has said it is a personal choice. And like I said, I'm trying really hard to stay in the football mindset on this and not the health and politics side. Please don't get that from me. But the truth is, we are seeing the fallout of this right now at Auburn football. We have players who are out due to close contacts. That can't be argued. It's already happened. The problem is going to be, what if this was 2 weeks later and this happened and these players are missing Penn State? What if it happens later in the season and they miss the Iron Bowl? We cannot have players miss these big games due to something like this. I get the personal choice argument, I get all that. But at the same time, they are on a team, they are trying to be competitive, and this is something that gives teams a competitive advantage. That cannot be argued. If you want to try to argue it, jump down in the comments, get all over that, and let me know what you think. But the fact of the matter is, the more players and the more coaches we have vaccinated, the fewer we can lose to contact tracing. Don't you think there's a reason that these top teams like Alabama and Georgia and some of these other teams are sitting at 97% to 100% vaccination rates? Think about that. Let's take a look at a comment from Sankey. Finish the drill, Sankey added. Access the vaccine, otherwise we know from last year is you may lose 2 to 3 weeks out of your season because of COVID. I mean, that's reality. Contact tracing was at the forefront of why we had to not play games in 2020, not COVID positive individuals. We can limit contact tracing through vaccine access. We've been communicating this for months. Here's what Nick Saban had to say about the same thing. On the other hand, you also have a competitive decision to make because you're going to be a part of a team, he added. I'm going to skip down to the bottom of this. So every player has a personal decision to make to evaluate the risk of COVID relative to vaccine. And then they have a competitive decision to make on how it impacts their ability to play in games. Because with the vaccine, you probably have a better chance. So take that for what it is. Like I said, I tried my best to keep politics and health and all that kind of stuff out of it. It's easy to bring that into it because of the topic, but I tried to keep that out of it and look at it from a pure football perspective. And looking at it from that point of view, please let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Please keep it civil. I know it's easy to get heated and debate about this. I don't mind if you debate, but please just keep it civil. We are all in the Auburn family. I don't want to have any ill blood between any of us, whether that's me to you or you guys between each other in the comments. Let's keep that out of it. Just talk about it from the football perspective. My second and final story this time is about Auburn recruiting rankings, and we did have 2 big commits on the same day we actually got the news about Harsin, and the 2 big commits we got were Omari Kelly and Trey Donaldson. So Omari Kelly is an athlete out of Hewitt-Trussville. He is 6'2", 180 pounds, and he is a 4-star commit, which because of that, those star ratings, I know people like to debate whether those stars matter or not, but I personally think they do to a certain degree. But the good news is we picked up a 4-star recruit, which that means our recruiting rankings are going to increase in the SEC and the national recruiting rankings. We also got Trey Donaldson out of Florida State University School in Tallahassee. He is also a 4-star recruit. He is 6'1", 190. The interesting part about Trey Donaldson is he's actually a 2-sport athlete. So he was recruited by Bruce Pearl and Brian Harsin, and he is going to both teams. So he will be playing basketball as well as football. So he is one of the more interesting recruits that we're picking up due to that fact. So he's going to be one to watch, and I can't wait to be able to watch him in the fall and in the winter, springtime because of the fact that he is a 2-sport athlete. Now let's discuss how these 2 new recruits affected us in the recruiting rankings. Nationally, Auburn is now ranked number 38 in the nation in recruiting for the 2022 recruiting class. In the SEC, this is where I've been complaining the most, and that is because we have been dead last in the SEC in recruiting. And Yes, we have a new coach, but I keep making this point. Everybody wants to argue it's a new coach. You can't be that hard on him. Vandy also has a new coach. So I think we can apply some pressure in this area. Vanderbilt has a new coach, and yet, after picking up these 2 recruits, Auburn is still behind Vanderbilt. I promise one day I'm going to stop talking about this, but we're going to have to get ahead of Vandy before I can do that. So, good news, Auburn jumped to number 13. We're no longer 14 out of 14. Bad news is we're still behind Vandy at number 12, but I'm not being pessimistic. I think we're heading in the right direction. I think we're going to pick up some more guys along the way in the next couple of months, and we will improve. I fully expect us to be at least in the top 20 by the time this is all said and done nationally. And as far as the SEC ranking goes, if I'm being optimistic, I'm hoping we'll finish around 7 or 8. But if you disagree with me on that and you think we'll finish higher, let me know down in the comments why you think we'll finish higher than 7 or 8 in the SEC in recruiting, and who you think we're going to pick up that will help us boost those numbers, boost that ranking. Thank you again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Last Week in Auburn Football. If you enjoy this kind of content, please go ahead and hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Also leave a like, comment, all that good stuff, because that helps YouTube push my video out to more people. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.